Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to Crime Zone. It likely goes without saying that everything at Disney World is intentionally made to be larger than life. The place is littered with colorful characters, resplendent decor, and thrilling rides and attractions. It's only fitting, therefore, that when things go awry at Disney, they often do so in an equally extraordinary way. It turns out that when you combine the most magical place on Earth with the state of Florida's already uncanny penchant for weird crime, you end up with some truly bizarre situations that almost seem like they were cooked up in the mind of an in-house Disney Imagineer. Without further ado, here are 5 totally what-the-f*** crimes that happened at Disney World. While minor violent confrontations between guests are unfortunately not all that uncommon at Walt Disney World, the vast majority don't end up on the news. However, in the fall of 2021, one such incident would stand out as an exception, generating headlines across the US for its unique combination of bizarre and interesting details. It all started one night last October when 2 sisters from New Jersey went out for what was supposed to be an evening of fun. The 29 and 31-year-old were vacationing in Orlando with other family members at the time, but on this particular night apparently went out as just the 2 of them. After arriving in Disney Springs, a section of the park dedicated to themed retail dining and entertainment, the 2 women had dinner at a steakhouse. After that, they went for drinks at an Irish bar, where it seems they consumed what can only be described as a generous amount of alcohol. It was this alcohol that allegedly provided the necessary fuel for what transpired next. Let's just say, it was devoid of any of the park's trademark Disney magic. According to reports, the problem began when the 2 sisters left the bar sometime after midnight and realized that both of their phones had died. Though Disney security helped them to call an Uber, the driver apparently took one look at the women when he arrived and said that they were too drunk to get into his vehicle. As the women waited for a taxi to be called so that they could finally be driven back to their hotel, they reportedly got into an argument. Things got more and more heated until the older sister called the younger one a bad mom and slapped her. The situation reportedly only escalated from there, with both sisters punching, slapping, and pulling each other's hair. A security manager tried to separate the women. However, the peace was short-lived when the older sister slipped in the younger sister's vomit and continued to try and fight her after falling into some nearby bushes. It was at this point that the younger sister allegedly removed her dress entirely before continuing to throw punches. When Orange County deputies arrived at the scene, both of the women were apparently screaming and crying. They attempted to question the younger sister who had been hit first. However, all she wanted to talk about was how much she didn't like her sister's boyfriend. Both women were arrested for domestic violence, battery, and disorderly intoxication. Luckily for the women, the case was dropped near the end of last year when the state attorney's office declined to pursue the case after both sisters requested that the other not be prosecuted. As a result, neither woman's name was released in news reports. What's perhaps even more fortunate for the 2 women, though, is the fact that Disney stated they do not have video surveillance footage of the drunken, naked brawl. Okay, so technically this next story takes place at a park owned by Universal, not Disney, but we decided to make an exception because we thought you'd find it interesting. That, and corporations are so conglomerated these days that I'm guessing that if you're like us, many of you probably would have had to look up the fact that the parks weren't owned by the same people anyway. But I digress. In the summer of 2022, a man walked into a bar and poured himself a drink. While the situation might sound like the setup for a cheesy punchline, unfortunately, as the man would soon realize, the joke was actually on him. According to reports, it all started on the evening of June 22nd, when 32-year-old Thomas Burridge was visiting Universal's Volcano Bay water park. While it's not exactly clear how, at approximately 7:10 p.m., Burridge noticed that one of the doors to a closed restaurant at the park called Krakatoa Katie's had been left open. Apparently unable to resist temptation, Burridge allegedly decided to check the place out, making a beeline for the bar area once inside. After heading behind the counter, Burridge apparently made himself at home, fixing himself a drink which theme park representatives later stated would have ordinarily cost around $50. It wasn't until the 32-year-old went to leave that he realized he had a serious problem, though. The door that he had entered through had closed behind him, and as a security measure, was no longer able to be opened. When Burridge tried the restaurant's other exits, he found that they had likewise been secured. You know, because people weren't supposed to be in there. Apparently deciding that the only way forward was to up the ante, the 32-year-old allegedly began shoulder ramming one of the exit doors. After about 3 or 4 times, the locks finally gave way and Burridge was free. At this point, you might think that most people in this situation would hightail it out of there. Sure, there might be more to see at Universal, but realistically, your fun day at the water park was over the second you decided to commit an impromptu burglary. Not to mention the fact that you just narrowly avoided trapping yourself at the crime scene. Apparently, though, this is not what happened. Instead, after hanging around for another roughly 2 hours, Burridge allegedly made the incredible decision to make a trip to Universal's security area. He said that he wanted their help to find something that he had lost at the park. What Burridge apparently didn't know was that sometime after he reportedly broke into Krakatoa Katie's, a member of the security team noticed the door he had destroyed during his brute force escape. Thanks to surveillance footage taken from the restaurant, they had images of the perpetrator, who they had been looking for, until Burridge walked right up to them. Security personnel allegedly recognized him because of the rather unique green swim trunks and pink belt bag he was wearing. According to reports, Burridge admitted that he had messed up and said that he shouldn't have stolen the drink. However, the $50 beverage apparently paled in comparison to the restaurant door, which park officials estimated would cost $1,700 to fix. Burridge was arrested and subsequently charged with misdemeanor theft as well as second-degree felony burglary. At around 6:30 p.m. on November 13th, 2020, security personnel at Walt Disney World contacted the Orange County Sheriff's Office requesting backup. Someone trying to enter Disney Springs had set off one of their metal detectors, and they feared that they might be carrying a concealed weapon. That someone was 18-year-old Nathaniel Smith, who was searched and was reportedly found to be carrying what appeared to be a Glock 19 handgun, which had been tucked into the waistband of his pants. Rather than trying to deny the obvious, Smith allegedly decided to take a different route, throwing a pretty wild curveball when a responding deputy arrived at the scene. The teenager claimed that he was a recently hired special agent with the Georgia division of the DEA. To back up what he was saying, Smith reportedly pulled out a gold badge that read, quote, Drug Enforcement Administration Special Agent. When asked for his official DEA ID, Smith said that unfortunately he didn't have it with him. He was apologetic, though, saying that he knew it was against policy not to have photo ID with him, and that he was mad at himself for the mistake. Of course, none of this was true. Smith wasn't in the DEA, he hadn't forgot his credentials because he didn't have any, and his concealed weapon was actually a BB gun that had been designed to look like a Glock. While there were no shortage of red flags about Smith's story, things really started to fall apart when the deputy questioning him asked for the name and number of his supervisor to verify his employment. Smith reportedly got visibly nervous and couldn't provide accurate information. Also, while the DEA does have an office in Georgia, it's called the Atlanta Division, not the Georgia Division. The final nail in the coffin allegedly came when the deputy did a quick search on Amazon. There, he found the exact same fake badge that Smith had previously flashed. Once the deputy confronted Smith with all of this information, he reportedly admitted that he wasn't telling the truth and was arrested. Perhaps the most ironic thing about the whole situation was that it was Smith's wild bluff, not the BB gun, that reportedly ended up getting him in the most trouble. While he was charged with unlawfully displaying a badge and carrying a concealed weapon, these were both misdemeanors. Falsely impersonating an officer, however, was a felony, one punishable by up to 5 years in prison. At the current time, it's unclear if Smith's case has yet gone to court. Applying for a new job and being unsure of yourself is a situation that I'm sure the vast majority of us can relate to. In our increasingly digital world, you often can't even get a face-to-face interaction without already making it through a sea of potentially hundreds of other applicants. Even then, it can be difficult to know how to stand out. That being said, standing out can also be as much a curse as it is a blessing, as the line between creativity and stupidity is sometimes perilously thin. Case in point, the subject of our next story, whose outside-the-box thinking landed him in jail rather than a job. According to reports, it all started on May 31st of this year when security personnel at Disney's Swan and Dolphin Hotel called Orange County Police to alert them about a possible theft. A man had been seen pushing a large cart away from the hotel and appeared to be acting strangely and looking confused. When officers arrived at the scene, they spoke with the man in question, who was wearing a gray t-shirt, beige work pants, a high-visibility orange work vest, and a Walt Disney World staff name tag. The man identified himself as David E. Rogers and provided police with a supposed name and address. He also claimed to be a Disney employee, saying that part of his job was to move items from one location to another, and even provided the name of a man who he said was his direct supervisor. While the man's story appeared somewhat credible on the surface, as soon as police began to probe further, it quickly fell apart. There was no record of a man named David E. Rogers employed at Disney with the address and birth date the suspect had provided. And while the name of the supposed supervisor was a man who worked at Disney, apparently his job was in Burbank, California. Things only unraveled further when officers asked the now unknown man to see some ID, and he responded that he had left his wallet in his employee locker. When the man was asked to lead police to the locker, he proceeded to take them on a meandering and confused journey around the resort, where it was clear he didn't know where he was going. Amazingly, the man did eventually manage to stumble across an employee locker room where he attempted to continue the charade. However, when he tried multiple times to break into a locker that clearly wasn't his, officers finally decided that they had been patient enough and told him that they could see his wallet in his pocket. The man handed over his real driver's license, which identified him as 44-year-old David E. Proudfoot. A further investigation revealed that the items that Proudfoot had been seen by staff moving earlier that day were a life-size statue of R2-D2 and a game machine which he had taken from the hotel. The Star Wars statue alone was estimated to be worth around $10,000. However, the 44-year-old claimed he wasn't stealing. Instead, he said that his bizarre behavior that day had a truly innocent explanation. You see, he had a pending job application with Walt Disney World Security, and he figured that if he managed to move a few items around, he would have exposed the flaws and weaknesses in the company's security, thus landing him a better-paying job. While this explanation was already strange enough on its face, any remaining credibility that Proudfoot had reportedly went out the window when police conducted a search of his home. Inside, they allegedly found thousands of dollars worth of more items that had been taken from Disney parks in recent months, including expensive bathroom light fixtures that had been ripped from walls, a $4,000 wooden towel cabinet, and a gold necklace. Needless to say, Proudfoot did not get that job at Disney. According to the most recent information available about the case, Proudfoot is currently facing charges including 3 counts of third-degree grand theft and obstruction by false information. Last we heard, he was being held at the Orange County Jail on a $9,650 bond. For his sake, let's hope he didn't try to test the security measures there as well. If you've ever been to Disney World before, you might remember that just east of its Magic Kingdom theme park, there is a small body of water called Bay Lake. The natural lake is about 1 mile across at its longest point, and is the namesake of the city of Bay Lake, which in addition to Lake Buena Vista, are the 2 municipalities essentially controlled by Disney, and which house all of its Orlando area parks and resorts. While Disney goes out of its way to meticulously label all of its attractions on its official park maps, if you give one of these a quick glance, you might notice something interesting. Almost smack dab in the middle of Bay Lake is an 11.5-acre island, which has been left conspicuously unmarked. However, this wasn't always the case. The island was first utilized as an attraction by Disney in 1974, when it was opened to the public as Treasure Island. Treasure Island featured a pirate theme and was inspired by the 1950 Disney film of the same name. Just 2 years later, the attraction was renamed Discovery Island and was turned into a zoological park, mostly known for its plant life and its exotic birds. It was geared towards families, especially those who wanted a relaxing alternative to the hustle and bustle of its main parks. Though the attraction managed to go on in this state more or less unchanged for over 20 years. By the late 1990s, Discovery Island was seeing less and less interest from guests. While it's not exactly clear why this was the case, many sources attribute this in large part to Disney's brand new Animal Kingdom theme park, which opened its doors in 1998. The following year, the decision was made to close down Discovery Island for good. Only this time, nothing new would be taking its place. If you're wondering why we just went on a weird tangent about the history of an obscure island at Disney World, well, if we're being honest, we thought it was interesting. But, we promise, it's also relevant to the story. You see, as Discovery Island sat unused for the next 2 decades, it became something of a destination for urban explorers, who wanted to document the decaying attraction. However, none would arguably take it as far as the subject of this segment, a 42-year-old Florida man named Richard McGuire. On April 30th, 2020, security personnel at Walt Disney World contacted the Orange County Sheriff's Office about a suspected trespassing case. An unknown man, later identified as McGuire, had triggered a wildlife trail camera on Discovery Island. Unlike most ordinary trespassers on the island, though, McGuire hadn't just been there to do a quick look around. According to Disney's security staff, they had reason to believe the 42-year-old was actually camping there. However, they had been unable to find him. As the island was obviously only accessible by boat, the sheriff's office sent in a marine unit who searched around the overgrown island and landed a team of officers there to do a ground search. At one point, a helicopter was even brought in to assist the investigation from the air. Despite all of these tactics, police came up empty-handed, and after hours were forced to abandon their search. They stayed in the area, however, and McGuire was ultimately captured after he left Discovery Island in his own boat and came back to the mainland. A few hours later, police also tracked down McGuire's girlfriend, who had apparently been hanging out in a van near the place where he originally launched his boat. When questioned by police, McGuire pleaded ignorance. He said that he had no idea that Discovery Island was off limits, and that he thought it was, quote, a tropical paradise. He also said that he had been camping there for a couple of days and had originally planned to stay there for a week, but had decided to come back early. Of course, police weren't buying any of this. In addition to the numerous no trespassing signs both on the way to the island and on the island itself, they knew that no reasonable person could have believed that it was a, quote, tropical paradise because of the numerous derelict buildings and structures left over from when Discovery Island was used as a Disney attraction. There was also the fact that the police presence during the search had been far from subtle. They had broadcast loud messages informing McGuire he was trespassing, officers from the ground had been shouting for him, and let's not forget the helicopter. Oh, and the fact that all of this happened at the height of the pandemic, so technically, all of Disney's properties were closed to the public anyway. While it turned out that police were correct that McGuire knew exactly what he was doing, it actually got even stranger from there. Not only had he trespassed onto the island to explore, but he had actually documented the whole experience for his YouTube channel, Southern Pirate Outdoors. In the footage, he could be seen driving to Disney, boating across Bay Lake, and camping out in Discovery Island's abandoned buildings. He even took footage while he was running and hiding from the police search team, who could be heard at various points yelling in the background. At one point, he claimed that he had been without water for 24 hours because the quote, "Disney cops took my gear bag with my water rations." And he also filmed himself covering his body with leaves to try to make it harder for the helicopter to spot him. Perhaps most bizarre of all, though, is the intro to McGuire's first video about the whole situation, titled Discovery Island Recon, in which he gives a brief outline as to his reason for wanting to investigate the island in the first place. During this preamble, he refers to Discovery Island as the quote, "real Jurassic Park," alleging that the Discovery Island attraction was used as a front to hide Walt Disney's private laboratory where researchers conducted sinister scientific experiments. As far as we can tell, McGuire doesn't go very far in depth about what he believes these experiments were, but he does mention the Illuminati, refers to Walt Disney as a quote, "ruthless Gestapo Nazi leader," and says that Discovery Island was only closed after Walt Disney's quote, "health degenerated along with his evil mind." McGuire goes on to insist that the area was closed off as part of a cover-up, but that to this day, Disney guards are still tasked with keeping its secrets, as well as, quote, "killing the vermin disease-carrying rats with ecolab traps." While this wild conspiracy theory is ridiculous enough on its face, just in case some of you need reassurance for whatever reason, it's worth pointing out that the island wasn't even acquired by Disney until 1965, the year before Walt Disney's death. And as previously mentioned, the land wasn't actually used for anything until 1974, nearly a full 8 years after the founder had passed away. So yeah, in addition to the allegations just being plain bizarre, the timeline for a secret laboratory of horrors just doesn't add up. Needless to say, after McGuire was caught coming back from Discovery Island, he was placed under arrest and subsequently charged with trespass on property other than structure or conveyance. He ultimately accepted a plea deal and pleaded no contest in September of 2020, after which he was slapped with a $100 fine as well as associated court fees and prosecution costs. He was also banned from Disney parks for life. That being said, McGuire's videos are still up on YouTube at the time of this recording, and you can check them out yourself if you're interested. Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a minute to thank our amazing supporters over on Patreon. As many of you are aware, our situation on YouTube always seems to be a bit uncertain, but our patrons help to ensure that we can continue to make content like this long term without having to worry as much about what surprises might be thrown our way. Plus, patrons also get access to 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. If you'd like to help support the channel directly, head over to patreon.com/crimezone to join. You can also find that link in the description below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and take care.